Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Free Speech Matters. This time I'm going to a colleague far, far away, a director of the Free Speech Union of Australia, which union, together with the UK, which was the founder union, New Zealand, Switzerland, and Canada, are trying to fight for free speech or promote or just generally lobby for free speech in the Anglosphere at this stage. But as you can see, we're starting to shift out of the Anglosphere. To this end, I'd like to welcome Dr. Reuben Kirkham. Reuben, welcome.
Thank you.
Reuben, just give us an idea of what the free speech environment is always not like at the moment in Australia, because Australia is starting to develop a reputation of being sort of the top Anglophone offenders of the right to free speech.
Absolutely. I mean, we have had, shall we say, a very censorious Labour government, supported by the Greens, sometimes supported by the opposition. And for example, last week they passed a hate speech bill, which included rewriting certain criminal offences. So rather than intending to cause a particular harm, it was merely reckless. And this was to do with threats. And it also included a minimum sentence. And the problem with this, it was rushed through. Amendments were made before anyone had a chance to even challenge what was going on. And in practice, it probably will not be used very often, but it's the chilling effect of having a law like that. There was also the age verification bill, which was rushed through in 24 hours last year. And we managed to organise in the 24-hour consultation period 15,000 individual submissions to go in. And we got a bit of a result there. The result in that case was that they added a provision in the bill that limited their ability to make people use digital ID to verify someone's age when accessing a service. But of course, these age verification bills, they're really about online censorship. They're really about having a chilling effect because people know who is writing what post and undermining the presence of anonymous free speech on the internet. And of course, what is striking about Australia is the global nature of the things that they've been trying to do. And they had their world first online safety commissioner called Julie Inman-Grant. And this is not something you want to be a world first in. Yeah, they call it online safety, but in practice, this online safety is really about online censorship. It is the sole thing that this office is concerned with. And she has been running around.
I see you've made a very big.
Yeah. I mean, there was a very famous case last year.
This is a very big thing that is your Australia.
Yeah. So the first case involving her that got international notoriety was the case involving this bishop being stabbed in Sydney. And they tried to take down off the worldwide internet every video as something that was quite mild. And there wasn't even any blood. This is something that should be on the news, really. And then their justification was, there's some screaming in it. And they tried to say, we should ban VPNs to make sure no one in Australia could see it, etc., etc. They lost. I mean, they were laughed out of court, and that involved X-Corp. But what we've been looking at is the wider issue of the E-Safety Commissioner's Office. So she has this other world-leading scheme, apparently being a pejorative remark about her so-called world-leading nature. And this scheme allows any Australian who's upset about something online to make a report to her office and claim it's adult cyber abuse. Now, in reality, pretty much none of this stuff is actually adult cyber abuse. She's issues about 4 notices a year that formal notices that are actually enforceable. But she has this sneaky little scheme that we unravelled, where she would issue what is called an informal notice, where she'd write to the social media company and she would say, this is breaching your term of service, it's harassing, take your pick, right? Basically, this really needs to be taken down. But should leave off the formal notice part of it. Just make it look a bit like a formal notice. And because she said it's not a real notice, she's undermined the key check and balance that if you're a person who posted that material to the internet or reposted it, you have the right to know that that notice has been issued. Well, she said, well, these are not real notices. Therefore, we didn't really issue them. And 99% of the notices she issued weren't real. But they were obviously having the real effect of taking posts down, otherwise she wouldn't be issuing them. And so in the case of Celine Baumgarten versus the Safety Commissioner that we ran to the new body called the Administrative Review Tribunal, she basically sent an army of 7 lawyers along, and we picked up one of these informal notices and said, well, look, we're challenging it anyway. And the tribunal said, yeah, it's a real notice. We have jurisdiction to hear it for the purposes, at least, of an appeal. And because these are now real notices, of course, as far as the law is concerned, there are reviewable decisions, to use the term in the statute, then the rights that come with reviewable decisions are there. The right to know about it, the right to challenge it. And this is where the Safety Commissioner is in a lot of trouble, because she's now got 8,000 or so of these informal notices she's issued across various schemes. And it turns out, of course, that she now needs to tell the people involved. And though we haven't heard anything from her, so we set up a tool on our ndsafety.au microsite that anyone in the world can use. It's ndsafety.au/censored. And you can go on it and you just fill out the form. It's got put your name in. You can put a pseudonym in if you want. Email, again, you can put a fake email in if you want, as long as it will come back to you. You don't have to use an email with your name in, for example. And the handles of whatever social media accounts you believe she may have censored. And she gets 28 days to search for all her records and tell you if she censored you or not. Now, most of the time she won't have done this, but of course, through this we'll discover, we hope, what she has been censoring and if there are any patterns in what she's been censoring. For example, has she been censoring gender-critical content? Well, it looks like it. We anecdotally get the idea that there's particular ideological viewpoints in her office, and they're very keen on censoring it. And Celine Baumgarten's case was about that. All that happened in that case was she put an innocent video pointing out that there was a queer club in a primary school, which is very unusual for 8-year-olds to be learning about this sort of stuff. But there you go. And the teacher was the rainbow flags, progress play flags, was very, very proud about it. So Celine made this video explaining what happened and pointing out, she thought this should not be going on in the primary school. And the teacher claimed it was cyber abuse, harassment, etc. And so the Safety Commissioner said, well, it doesn't meet one of these criteria, so we can't do anything formally, so we'll do something informal. And they made something that looked so much like a formal notice that X originally thought it was a formal notice, and they took it down, at least although geo-blocked it in Australia. So we challenged this notice, and it turned out the Safety Commissioner says, oh, we didn't really mean to issue that notice, therefore you've got no proceedings. And this thing went before a federal court judge, before a special tribunal. It was the first case that this new special panel of a tribunal heard. A federal court judge and 2 very senior tribunal members heard a case. It's normally about stopping things like robo-debt. And robo-debt was basically a scandal in Australia where loads of people had extra debts added to them, accounts, mostly poor people on social security, by a computer. It was badly programmed and it was covered up for a while. So they wanted to avoid something like that happening for a sustained period of time again. And the first case this special tribunal heard was about the e-Safety Commissioner censoring the internet. And the judgment is excoriating. I mean, it was a very weird experience going to the hearing. So the hearing happened back in December. We brought one barrister along, myself, and they had 7 lawyers on their side. And they made the mistake of having their senior lawyer as a witness. And the senior lawyer got cross-examined for about 3 hours. Most of the by the tribunal, which isn't really a cross-examination, but you get the idea. And he was like, and it's like, so the judge was like, so what legal basis do you have for doing it? The general protection of online safety, my lord. It was like all this endless. It's like, and the judge was like, well, where do we find this statutory power that you're using? Of course, there isn't one. Now, the tribunal wasn't strictly deciding that question, so they didn't issue a formal ruling on it, but they added an appendix. And these are, the judge's considerations and concerns were rule of law considerations. They were concerned that essentially that statutory scheme was being entirely circumvented, and that this needed looking at. But there's also a flip side to this. There are people who've got real complaints about cyber abuse, right? You've got someone who's got their nudes being taken and put online, which is called image-based cyber abuse. And if you're a complainant, you're being completely failed by that office. That was what we found most striking. So they only had 2 out of 7 staff they were supposed to have in that particular division. They took a while to reply to things. They were also hiding from complainants their right to appeal to the tribunal. So they weren't just duping end users, they were duping everyone with this system. And that is what is so remarkable about it. So the safety commissioner is getting $40 million a year, and they did not have the staff at all to handle these complaints, and they claim to be an agency protecting the vulnerable. The money's going somewhere, maybe on random trips to Washington, D.C., to rant about people. There's a very funny video of the e-safety commissioner herself, Julian Mangrant, who takes, I think, about $500,000 of taxpayers' money every year, ranting about how we were a front group for Elon Musk and X. And it's like, really? I mean, I've never met Elon Musk. We've had the odd bit of correspondence with X, but we definitely don't get any money from X, and we pay X to advertise, but that's under the usual basis that anyone can do when they get an account on X. X is not paid as a dollar. I wish they would pay as a part of money. It'd be a great conspiracy to be part of. But you've got a senior government official raising conspiracy theories about a free speech organisation being a front organisation for Elon Musk. I mean, why would that happen? And it turns out she was upset because we're encouraging people to make freedom of information requests. Well, it's like she appeared. Yeah, she appeared on this video. There's this wonderful video of her going, "Oh, I'm really accountable." Well, we've got the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, we've got freedom of information, we've got the Ombudsman. And she thought she had this, I imagine, this system of not being accountable. And so when someone actually makes freedom of information requests, and the reason we're making the website we set up originally, it took me about, I'm a computer scientist by background, it took me about 12 hours to knock up a tool. And it was just, are you spying on me? Why are we sending those requests to our agency? Well, because we found, looking at federal court proceedings, that there was all these posts she'd collected of people from the Free Speech Union as part of an application for her staff to be made anonymous, some very weird application. Apparently there's a lot more buried underneath it that was, our ones are public because they weren't bad, apparently. But it turns out she was basically running all these reports and anything critical of e-safety and collecting and hoovering up and saving it indefinitely. So some people had 9,000 pages of documents that she apparently held on them. That apparently was too much to, for them to do. But people who had 3,000 pages, they managed to actually get the documents themselves rather than a refusal because there was too many documents for them to look at. It's like, why is she hoovering up all this data? But of course, if she wasn't spying on people, it'd be dead easy. Sorry, not spying on you. No documents on you because I'm not collecting information that I don't need to collect about you. So yeah, it created a whole bunch of work that we're not necessarily expecting. But that's because she went to the Senate and said, well, we're not doing any of this. This is a malicious fault. I don't use the word malicious falsehood, but basically said that it was all made up. It's like, well, let's test this then. So 500 people tested it. Okay. And apparently it caused a 3,000% increase in freedom of information requests. Well, I can tell we're now on a 6,000% increase of freedom of information requests since the Slane Baumgarten's ruling. And that's going to keep going up because anyone in the world can make a request. And we'd encourage you all to do this. I think it's really important that anyone who has been censored, and she can either keep responding to these individual requests, which will take a lot of work, or they can just come clean and make a list of all the censorship they've done over the last 3 years without any apparent legal basis. What did she take down? Can't she say? Can she at least make a list of the accounts that she targeted? And what is so scary about what she was doing is that you'd have people who would get their accounts taken down. There would have been a complaint from the e-safety commissioner, but they'd never know that the e-safety commissioner is involved. They would never know that the e-safety commissioner existed properly unless you're Australian. I mean, why would you know? And they would never know, that the social media company did it because there was a complaint made from the e-safety commissioner. So it's just remarkable, really.
So what are the consequences for her and the commission as a result of FSU taking a stand and challenging?
Well, where do I
extraordinary?
I mean, it's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. I mean, I guess the first consequence is reputational. I mean, this has ended up in the Wall Street Journal, and it's also ended up being noticed by lawyers around the world. So, she's done a massive own goal for this online censorship regime, and she's looked like a prat, would be a mild way of putting it. But more importantly, it makes this informal notice scheme completely impractical, because the whole point of the informal notices is that the end user doesn't know and can't challenge it. Well, if they are still legally challengeable decisions, and this was trite law, really, for the most part. It was, a case 10 years before I was born called Brian Lawler that essentially set out the principles that apply in this case. And Brian Lawler, it's a landmark case. The High Court has endorsed it, the High Court being the highest court in Australia. So, I know some countries have different meaning of High Court, but High Court is the highest court in Australia. So, this is standard law, but they still sent the 7 lawyers in to try and argue the world is flat. And it turns out that, unsurprisingly, a tribunal decided it was round. And they were not impressed. But, I mean, if the e-safety commissioner, apparently a guardian of the vulnerable, was correct, right? You'd have vulnerable NDIS, which is a disability scheme, right? The NDIS could just say, oh, no, we've not really made a decision yet. It's not quite a decision. And they could never be held accountable by a tribunal. And that would be all the way across government decision-making. Everyone would try it, right? I mean, it'd be great to avoid these pesky appeals, right? If, I just never really quite made the decision. I didn't really make it. I was thinking about making it, but I didn't make it. And of course, it's nonsense. And we knew it was nonsense, which was why we challenged it. We knew what the outcome would be when we filed the claim. And they tried everything. They tried to hide documents. They came up with the excuses why we should not be provided with things. We had to make a freedom of information request to get the relevant documents to the proceedings. And a request to X-Corp. X-Corp gave us some documents, but that's not how a proceeding is supposed to happen. They are supposed to be model litigants. They are supposed to be giving us the documents and not hiding things. And it makes you wonder what else is being hidden in that office. I mean, it's a remarkable situation.
I mean, what is the government's response to essentially the ruination of the Commission's reputation and her significant role in it and being the perpetrator of these egregious actions? I mean, have they reacted? Is she still there? Is the Commission standing?
Still annoying people, still ranting. She's apparently launched, yesterday she's launched some sort of tech foundation in Australia, tech policy organisation. I don't know how you can run a tech policy organisation without anyone who knows anything about computer science on it, but that's apparently what they're doing. And it'd be a front for her political views and all that sort of stuff. It's got an advisory board, including a bunch of activists like her. It's all about online censorship, this tech policy advisory by people who don't understand technology. I mean, this is the fun part of dealing with the e-safety commissioner's office. She is inept, beyond inept. And they really don't understand the technology, which is fantastic because she's just been given the whole age verification thing. That's the only reason we actually wanted to stay in post, right? So she can screw this up over the next year and the whole age verification thing will melt down. We're looking forward to that. But she is obstinately incompetent.
So would it need and would it help to have a change in government for something to be done?
Well, both sides have endorsed her. So, I mean, I think this is the thing with tech, right? Most people don't understand it, so they don't quite understand what they've endorsed. And of course, once they've endorsed it, then they have to backtrack. And I think this is the mess. I think this is what's happened with all the online safety stuff. I mean, the idea of age verification, well, it doesn't exist, in any sensible way. I mean, you could do things like facial recognition of age, which would be very interesting when they find it works a lot less accurately on Black people, trans people. It would work terribly on. It works worse on women compared to men. So you're going to have a lot. So you have this. Say you have this system where you age verify, and if you don't pass this age verification on your photograph or whatever, then you have to use a document or something. Well, you're going to get a lot of very interesting discrimination claims out of it, which they don't seem to have realised, which is quite simple, but relatively well. It's what we'd expect, right? That they'd screw this up, but the whole thing's a fantasy. I mean, it's a complete fantasy. This age verification thing. They're going to try and use it to sneak in digital ID, but I'm not sure how they're going to manage that. What will happen is that there'll be all these unregulated websites that don't comply with anything. It's going to undermine child safety, which is very unfortunate for the parents and children. And I hope it doesn't turn into another, we need something else on top of it, rather than recognizing that this is a disaster to begin with. I mean, if you want to protect kids from things online, you can put software on the phone that does the censoring for you. You could check if it's a porn video. You could put things in that limit people getting 500 notifications. And now these things could just be put in the operating system. They could legislate very simply to do something effective. They could even do it themselves with Android, right? You can make phones available that are protected in a certain way for under 16s. It's not hard to do. This is not rocket science. And with modern phones, you could run AI on the devices, right? You could run real-time analysis of what content is, right? And then you check it before it goes to the kids, right? There's all these things you can do. I know it's not perfect, but as long as it's alerting when it's picking up on things frequently, right? The parents are going to know that the kid is trying to access all this stuff because it's going to catch most of it. Suddenly,
the hacking world has proven that everything is ultimately a measure to try and minimize risk. There's no such thing as removing the risk of something entirely. So from that, it just makes no sense to me. I suppose the most important question is, what has this case and the raising and exposing of these issues done for FSU Australia?
Well, it's gotten some attention, I guess. We're in the other side of the world, and the international press is concerned about it. And there is going to be quite a big case, although we're not running it, in a couple of months' time. It's being completely paid for, I imagine, by a bunch of Christian groups in the US. That's about over 1 tweet taken down on the pronoun issue. So what this has done is put Australia on the map as a battleground for free speech. It is a profoundly important international battleground where they seem to be testing out some of the more stupid ideas that might get exported somewhere else. I mean, we begin with e-Karen, e-safety, whatever you want to call them. E-deranged, maybe, given some of the things she keeps saying. Like, apparently, the freedom of information requests, I think she called it technology-supported gender-based violence or something. Can't remember the exact acronym for it because it was so absurd, but it's like, no, we're sending requests into a government office to provide information about people like ourselves that you have collected on us. I don't know how that is gender-based violence, but she apparently believes that. So she's increasingly deranged, which is great. You've got her, the Lincoln Project, right? I mean, it's a bit like that, what we've got going on with her office, it looks like. I mean, it's like she winds herself up like a clock over this. And it's like, and why was she so wound up about the freedom of information requests? Well, because she had a report being generated of all the freedom of information requests going into her organization. It's like, what head of agency has something like that going on? was very unusual for a head of an agency to have all the freedom of information requests being copies of them being sent and what's been requested, and a table sent every week for her, along with reports of every criticism of her on social media. She's obsessed, and she believes that litigation against the government is a conspiracy, apparently. And it's like, really? Do you understand like accountability in public life? So the damage this will cause will be, well, damage to her office. It's considerable. I mean, I do not know what this is. I mean, Celine's decision was issued 4 days ago, right? 4 clear working days now. We haven't heard a peep out of her office apart from one small comment in the press saying they're thinking about it. And it's like, well, you don't really need to think about it. You just need to stop censoring things that you've got no legal basis to censor. It doesn't require much thought. And stop lying to the public about what you're doing or misleading them. 2 quite simple things, but apparently she's not so keen on that.
Can I just ask you, the force of nature that has entered the presidency in America took a mighty pen to DEI in government, and certainly, is completely rearranging the atmosphere with regard to the fact that DEI is harmful. It's nonsense. Companies are bailing out of it, sort of hand over fist, because it really doesn't fit largely doesn't fit any logical prescription. Has it had any impact in Australia? Is it useful? Does it at least make people talk about the fact that DEI is not, the word of God?
Well, I mean, it's a start, but it hasn't had the seismic change we hoped for. Apart from the opposition are going to take on some of the DEI nonsense by the looks of it. So if they get elected, we've got a federal election by the end of May. It's not been called yet. So probably April or May. We don't know exactly. We think it will have some impact, but it's not going to be the overhaul that's happened in the USA, unfortunately. And the deep clean of all the DEI appointments. Australia is invested. And I think that there is a distinction between the USA and Australia, or say Canada, in that we have Indigenous groups. And apparently they're special and holy because they were here before. And there's a very deep obsession about things like what they call reconciliation, and very, very weird things that happen that most of these Indigenous people, by the way, don't support. So it's these people who are upper middle class, apparently have got some vague Indigenous ancestry, but are basically white, and apparently that makes them special. So it puts it on steroids in a way, the issues. I mean, you have made up jobs for people because they're Indigenous in certain cases, or say they're Indigenous, to be accurate. Whilst you've also got some Indigenous people living in great poverty, in general, basically on reservations and areas that are miles and miles away from most cities. They do nothing for them, of course, that's effective. But they're very keen on some people are basically just exploiting it. And remember, DEI is basically a rort. It's a bunch of people not able to succeed on merit, so they cheat, right? This is not about helping people who are genuinely disadvantaged. It's about a certain elite helping themselves. And it's I think that eventually DEI will fail. And I'm hopefully that there'll be severe consequences to the people who drove it, so nothing like this happens again. Because it's horrendous. You've got people, say, with disabilities who are being really poorly treated. And of course, DEI really hates disabled people because disabled people need concrete action taking, right? They have the whole duty of reasonable adjustments. But DEI also hates working class people. Right, so the 2 groups that have been actually, I'd say, historically disadvantaged, particularly historically disadvantaged, are the groups that DEI does not cater for.
Yeah. So I think in that respect, the Trump administration is doing us a huge favor, because we're the sort of organizations that are in the fight, and it's really unmasking what I consider a very dangerous movement, because it is actually its empathy is performative. It's not substantive. It doesn't really seek to address the problems of real people.
Well, no, it seeks to do the opposite. It's like a reverse Robin Hood. It's about some greedy. Corporations love, right? You can put a rainbow lanyard on and not meet your obligations to say build ramps or get the right computer systems or to include disabled people in the workplace. Of course they love it, but look, performative virtue signaling, right? They love having the right flag in their thing, and they can say, "Oh, we've been doing great things," but they're very afraid for any objective analysis. Evidence is not something they like. And we've got universities in Australia with these TV screens costing $2 million or so to inject woke propaganda on campus, boom it out of people. At Monash University, have 2 of them, one on each of the main campuses. And hopefully one day they'll get dismantled. But that's literally what they do. So it's not like that all over Australia. Victoria is particularly bad. But some universities have become woke utopias, and they're not, whatever they claim to be, they're not universities. They're not engaged in the pursuit of truth. It's just some people basically milking the system for their own ends. So it is, it's like a pseudo-law movement, right? Normally pseudo-law movements are people who are trying to say, "Oh, I shouldn't pay tax because of some old version of the Bible," or "I don't need a driver's license because of some old version of the Bible," or "I'm not subject to the law because I claim I'm Indigenous." The usual freeman on the land type stuff, right? But this is a pseudo-law movement that seems to sometimes work. People are getting benefits when they cast the magic spell. But discrimination law is based on substantive equality, not giving people special advantages, apart from, in some cases, disabled people, right? So disabled people in the group that actually have the right quite frequently to be treated more favourably, but there's a good reason for that. Imagine there was 50 jobs on the job market, and due to your care needs or ability to travel, you can only do 2 of them. Now, surely the disabled person in that case should be prioritised for those 2 jobs. That's substantive equality. And there are things organisations should do, right? They should provide, for example, in some cases, the opportunity to provide assistance for academics who need caring support for their family to go to conferences, or and giving people reasonable workloads. And it's a lot of, and this is what organisations are avoiding. They're avoiding the hard work of making their practices reasonable, rather than we'll just pick a few winners to stop everyone else complaining, right? And by the way, if you complain, you're evil. Because we've had, I'll give an example. There's a law school in Australia. It used to be the top law school, and they hired this Indigenous guy post-PhD, immediately post-PhD, which is remarkable for an academic. His thesis, if it could be called that, was basically interviews with 20 of his mates and informed by Marxist theory. And he was around to run around the law school and tell everyone what to say and how to indigenise the curriculum. It's just really a tool for management bullying, right? So they could go around and say, if you don't do what the management want, you're racist, right? That's what they do, right? That's the whole scheme. It's just this naive indigenous guy was being used basically as a stick for some communist bully in the faculty to go and go after all the academics in it. And it's like, so how does this indigenising the curriculum help, say, law students are Indigenous? Well, it's a disaster for them. You know why? Because every academic is going to be on tenterhooks when they're dealing with Indigenous students. They basically are not going to get the same education as everyone else. If they do achieve, their achievements will be doubted. And actually, what Indigenous people need, particularly we've got a high Indigenous incarceration rate in Australia. What they need is competent lawyers, right? Fantastic, great idea to give Indigenous people opportunities to learn law, but it's not going to really help Indigenous people if you're not really teaching them the law. It's like, say, and then why should Indigenous people trust another Indigenous practitioner? So they're basically wrecking access to justice for Indigenous people while pretending to help them. It's incredibly cynical. So if you work through most of these DI initiatives, they aren't actually often negative for the groups they purport to help. And I think that's something to bear in mind. It's just a bunch of very affluent people trying to basically take things for themselves. It's good old-fashioned rorting. People eventually realise that.
No, it's racist and it's patronizing, and ultimately destructive. I think it's Australia's providing the sort of the backdrop for the very idea of the concept of being Orwellian, and you're going to have a hell of a lot of work cut out for you. Reuben, thank you very much.
Keeping us very busy.
Yeah. Yes. At least the one thing I'm certain of is that disruptors like Donald Trump have some impact simply because they are disrupting in the genuine sense of the word. Whether it's all good or not is another question, but it at least gives us something perhaps to work with and to refer to. And thank you very much for joining us and giving us a sense of just how startling, watching it from a South African perspective, how startling Australia is in this respect. Thank you very much.
It will get better. We will win. I'm confident we are winning. Right? We've taken down the misinformation bill, and now the E-Safety Commission is on the rocks. So we will do it methodologically, one by one. We will get there.
Chip away. More power to your elbow. Thanks.
Thank you.